History is full of epic battles and grand empires. But sometimes, history is just straight-up bizarre. Imagine a disease so weird that it forces you to dance non-stop until your heart literally bursts. Or a Roman emperor who was so out of his mind that he officially appointed his favorite horse as a high-ranking government senator. It sounds like a bad internet joke, right? But these are 100% real historical events that actually happened. Today on Global19, in this explainer, we look into the most ridiculous, hilarious, and unexplained moments in human history that sound completely fake but are historical facts.
Dancing non-stop until your heart bursts. I mean, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around, isn't it? It sounds like the plot of some surreal, fever dream horror movie. But we're going to see how a seemingly joyful act of human expression turned into a literal death sentence for hundreds of ordinary people just going about their daily lives.
And if that doesn't stretch your belief, how about this? Appointing a horse as a high-ranking government senator. Yes, a four-legged, hay-eating animal making actual policy decisions for one of the greatest, most sophisticated empires in the history of the world. We're talking about an ancient political system being turned entirely upside down by one man's staggering eccentricity.
So, the crucial point here is that as wild as these sound, they're 100% real historical events. This isn't a myth, it's not folklore, and it definitely isn't a modern internet meme. These are meticulously documented realities. As we go through these events today, you'll see exactly how these absurdities unfolded. So grab a notepad and get ready, because truth really is stranger than fiction.
Section 1. The Four-Legged Roman Senator. Emperor Caligula and Incitatus.
Let's start our chronological journey in ancient Rome with the infamous Emperor Caligula and his absolute favorite companion in the world, his horse Incitatus. Caligula ruled the Roman Empire in the 1st century, and his reign was packed with chaos, extreme extravagance, and total unpredictability. Listen to this. Incitatus didn't just sleep in a wooden barn. He was gifted a literal marble stable. He didn't just wear a regular leather saddle. He was draped in a purple cloak, a dye strictly reserved for the highest royalty. And to top the whole thing off, he wore a collar made entirely of precious stones. Caligula was treating this horse infinitely better than most Roman aristocrats treated themselves. Which brings us to a massive logical gap. Why give a horse so much power? Why would an emperor of Rome not only spoil an animal with marble and jewels, but actually officially plan to appoint it as a Roman senator? What on earth is the strategy behind this level of madness? Was he truly just insane, or was there some kind of method to the madness here?
Well, historians now suggest that it was actually the ultimate political troll. Caligula did this to openly and deliberately insult the actual politicians. By treating a horse like a high-ranking official and threatening to make him a consul, Caligula was sending a crystal-clear, devastating message to the Roman Senate. He was basically saying, "My literal horse is more qualified to rule this empire than you are." He leveraged unimaginable powers simply to humiliate the human lawmakers of Rome, proving he could do absolutely anything he wanted with zero consequences.
Section 2. The Deadly Dancing Plague, Mass Hysteria in 1518.
Okay, let's jump to 1518, straight into the cobblestone streets of Strasbourg, to see how we go from one man's calculated madness to a whole town's uncontrollable mass hysteria. The escalation of this plague is honestly terrifying. It starts quietly enough on day 1. A single woman, Frau Trophia, steps into the street and fervently begins dancing. There's no music, no celebration, just frantic movement. But she couldn't stop. Fast forward just 1 month later, and the bizarre contagion spread until 400 people joined in. Instead of arresting them, authorities intervened by actually building a stage for them. And the tragic end? Dancers literally collapsed, dying of strokes and heart attacks from sheer physical exhaustion.
Just think about that number for a second. 400. 400 people completely compelled by an unexplained psychological or physiological phenomenon. Dancing in a manic, sweaty trance right in the middle of a 16th century European city. This wasn't some small, isolated incident. It was a massive public health crisis of uncontrollable, fatal movement that completely paralyzed an entire town.
But you know what the absolute most baffling part is? The medical logic of the time. The authorities sincerely believed that these people just needed to, quote-unquote, dance it out. Yeah, they genuinely thought the cure for endless dancing was, well, more dancing. They actually hired professional musicians to keep the tempo going and strong men to hold the dancers upright, thinking that exhausting the illness out of their bodies was the soundest medical solution. It just goes to show you that historical reality and early medicine is often way stranger and more tragic than we could ever invent.
Section 3. Australia's Great Emu War. Military versus Nature in 1932.
Jumping ahead to the 20th century, we reach what might just be the ultimate punchline of historical absurdity. A literal, modern military operation pitted directly against flightless birds. It is a hilariously uneven matchup. On one side, you've got the Australian military, armed with actual Lewis machine guns, 10,000 rounds of ammunition, and combat-trained soldiers. On the other side, the emus. Their weapons? Speed, erratic movement, and surprisingly high group intelligence. Their forces? A staggering 20,000 birds that were wreaking absolute havoc on local wheat farms. The government actually formally deployed the military to wipe them out. So, with heavy machine guns on one side, and beaks, feathers, and skinny legs on the other, I have to ask you, who do you think won? Think about it for a second. An organized, modern military force with automatic weapons taking on a giant flock of overgrown, flightless birds in the Australian outback.
The shocking, beautifully documented historical fact is the emus won. No joke. The birds actually defeated the Australian military. It turns out emus are incredibly fast, running at speeds up to 30 miles per hour, and they naturally scatter in completely unpredictable directions the second a gun is fired. The soldiers simply couldn't get a clear shot. The military wasted thousands of rounds of ammunition for barely any bird casualties. The commanding officer literally had to admit defeat, pack up his machine guns, and order a humiliating retreat. The emus held their ground and won the war.
Section 4. Why Bizarre History Matters, Embracing the Chaos.
Let's pause for a moment and connect this all back to the bigger picture. What does an undefeated emu army, a deadly 16th century dancing plague, and a ridiculously spoiled Roman Horus actually teach us? Because beneath the comedy, there are real lessons here. First off, human history is deeply unpredictable. We love to trace a neat logical line of progress, but our timeline is actually full of totally chaotic detours. Second, extreme hubris, whether it's an ancient emperor thinking his power has absolutely no limits, or a modern military thinking they can easily outgun nature, almost always leads to absurd realities. And lastly, truth is consistently stranger than fiction. These anomalies are a constant, fascinating feature of the human story.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. If history is truly this bizarre, what unbelievable events are we living through right now that future generations will look back on and think are completely fake? What perfectly normal occurrence today will end up in a history explainer 100 years from now as absolute absurdity? It really makes you think about our own place in the timeline, doesn't it? Keep questioning, keep learning, and thank you for exploring history's strangest realities with me today.